Hey, everybody. Good afternoon from New Jersey. Once again, I and my guests are both coming from New Jersey, which always makes me really happy because I love New Jersey, because I live here. It's a great place. Welcome, Sabian Education Network members. Glad to have you guys come on in, join in. We have a very special day in store today. I see you guys coming in. Thank you. Thank you. So today, I'm extremely excited to have a living legend in the world of drums. Actually, my first interview in this series of all the interviews I've done for SEN, of an artist and educator who's not primarily known for drum set, but in this case known for marching, the legendary, and I'm proud to call an old friend of mine, Mr. Dennis DeLucia. Welcome, Dennis.
Thanks very much, Joe. Thanks for having me. Hello, everybody. We're ready to go. Let's chat.
Let's chat. But before we chat, I want to, because we may have some drum set players here who might not know your history, Dennis. I just want to give them a little bit of background about you. And so for those of you guys who don't know, and Dennis sent me his 2020 bio, and I've known Dennis a long time, and I forgot that I should be intimidated to speak to him when I read this bio because it's his accolades. Dennis is the first person that was inducted into all three of the major marching halls of fame: the DCI Hall of Fame, the WGI Hall of Fame, and the PAS Hall of Fame. Well-deserved member of all three of those halls of fame, among many other accolades, including being honored by Sabian, who he's been with as an artist endorser since when?
1987.
87. Wow. You were still judging me in my high school drum line. I was a junior. Dennis was a member of the legendary Hellcats, West Point marching ensemble, when he came out of his service in the U.S. Army. And he's known for his legendary work as the arranger and instructor for the Muchachos, the Bridgemen, Star of Indiana, Crossmen, Sunrisers, Caballeros. He taught at Rutgers University for many years. He had guys like Tommy Igoe and Pat Petrillo in his drum lines. And he is still the owner of the only Triple Crown percussion title from the Bridgemen, the Sunrisers, and Fantasia, which was DCI, DCA, and DCI Class A, where he won all those titles in the same year, which is so badass I can't even describe. And of course, I've known Dennis for many years as a eminent high school educator, judge of many drumline competitions, and interestingly also a commentator on TV. He's sort of like the Bob Costas of DCI. That's fair, right? Come on, that's fair.
Who was this guy you just talked about? Thank you very much for that, Joe. It's the halls of fame are always an interesting thing for me. Not only is it a great honor, I'm very humbled and proud, of course, of all of them, but I'm not in a hall of fame because I'm a great drum set player or a great orchestral player. I'm in the hall of fames because I've been surrounded by incredible kids as players, and even more than that, as surrounded by great teachers. So it's a group effort. It's not just me, never has been just about me. And I get the credit for a lot of it, but it's all group stuff. But thank you, Joe.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And in my humble estimation, someone who is a leader that thinks like that is worthy of those inductions, because that's a great leader, someone who inspires the other people to do their best work. And I think that's kind of where I want to start our discussion today. Now, for those of you guys watching, you guys know that Dom is often co-hosting with me, Dom Famularo, of course, and Dom interviewed Dennis for the sessions. And I went back and watched the interview before the session. I don't want to ask Dennis a lot of the same questions. He talked in detail with Dom about his upbringing and his early times. I didn't know that you met Gene Krupa. I learned all these things from the sessions interview. Yeah. So everybody, you should go back and watch to fill in some of Dennis's formative things with that. But I want to just kind of jump right in here, and from where you just talked about, Dennis. And there's kind of a saying, like you said, you were surrounded by great teachers and great kids and all that. A lot of our SEN members are teaching drumline. They're teaching marching. And I used to always say, when I was teaching lines, we competed with Piscataway, they were a great line. You had a hand in teaching them. I used to always tell the guys who taught with me and the girls who taught with me, There's nothing in the water that makes Piscataway have good drummers that just grow in Piscataway. The program is what makes them great. So if you could briefly just, for somebody who's getting into teaching, maybe they've been teaching privately, but now they have the group dynamic of trying to get a drum line of high school kids to play tight. Give us the 5-minute primer on where do you start?
Well, it depends on what the teacher's background is. I mean, I was a drum set player when I was younger, and then got very heavily into the drum corps scene and the marching percussion scene. But what I did was I took a lot of the elements that I learned by playing jazz and Latin music, and I brought that over to the way I wrote. So there was a lot of my own individual background and personality, and I found that over the years to be very, very important. But the couple of things that I learned as a teacher, number one, the teacher is not the master. The drum instructor or arranger is not the master in the environment. The teacher must serve two masters. One is the integrity, the idiomatic integrity of the music at hand, and the other is the real talent level and experience level of the kids who are standing in front of you. And if the teacher can appreciate both of those things, especially if you're the writer, you would be well on your way. Don't write stuff that will satisfy your own ego, even though you don't have the kids that can play stuff. Write stuff that the kids that you really have can achieve, and write it within the context of the music at hand. So let those two masters serve you, not the other way around. They're the boss. And I would teach, and I always believed in this, I would teach in ways that were very similar to the way I was taught and the way I played, which as a drum set background guy, totally relaxed, none of the what I call the squeeze and moan approach that too many marching percussion guys got into, especially in the 90s and the early 00s. But just nice and relaxed, let everything flow just the way you would behind your kit or behind a marimba. Just relax and let everything flow. Design a series of exercises that are germane to the book that you're going to play. If you're going to play a groove book, create a series of groove exercises. In fact, one of my favorite corps today are the Bluecoats. And one of the things they do that's so cool is when they're in the lot warming up before a show, their main instructor, Roger, sits behind a small kit. So instead of just the Dr. Beat or clicking sticks, he's laying down a groove, and then the exercises happen on top of that groove. I think that's a great way to approach it.
That's cool. So just breaking it down a little further, if you're writing for different lines, let's say at the high school level, do you have your exercise packets and your program of exercises? To some degree, is it sort of like, don't you retain the same basic elements? Like you're always going to have a check pattern thing. You're always going to have an eighth note thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but what I would do is if I have, let's say, a dozen exercises that I always draw from, if I'm standing in front of this drum line, I might only choose exercise 1, 4, 7, and 9. And if I'm standing in front of that drum line, I might choose 1, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So again, I'm going to pull from my preferences, pull the exercises that I think are significant for the kids that are actually in front of me.
One of the things that always fascinated me when I was, for a few years, I was teaching a lot of drum lines. One of the things that always fascinated me, and I never felt like I was great at it. We did pretty well sometimes, but you were a master and are a master at it, which is, could you talk a little bit about just how do you build the culture with the kids, right? Because you have kids who are in drumline, right? A lot of kids like it, and they do it. The line sort of plays the stuff. It's pretty sloppy. But then you have those communities or those schools where like the kids get it. Like they don't want to be the weak link. They get into that culture of success. Like how how do you cultivate that kind of a culture? Like, do you identify a student leader and then try to cultivate it there, or does it come from you as running rehearsals a certain way? I mean, it's sort of a big question, but
Well, it's always great as a teacher when you have a section leader who's really got it together, a good player, and even better, a more mature, young person, whether it's high school, college, drum corps, whatever. So that's always, you're very fortunate when you have that environment. But beyond that, I think you have to impart confidence to your kids. You have to impart a sense that you believe in them and what they can achieve, and a sense that you're not there just for your own ego, that you are there to make them better. And you're going to write charts that will enable them to succeed. You will teach in a way that will hopefully encourage them to not only succeed in drumline, but to go on and do drum set, or go on and do mallet percussion or whatever. So you always want to think in a bigger context than the one that you are actually sitting in front of the drum line.
right. That's great. Yeah, that's always seems like such a wonderful ball that once you get rolling, it can continually roll for many years once that culture is set up in a certain school with a certain teacher.
It's like anything else. Success breeds success, right?
Yeah.
So when you have the great college football team, you're going to recruit all the great players, and you can continue to be great. And I think the same is true in our music experience, whether it's concert band or orchestra or drumline, marching band, whatever it is. Once you cultivate a good program, one that it will encourage new kids to want to participate, then you can keep that greatness moving ahead all the time.
Right. You had mentioned before about writing. So, let's assume for a second that you're writing for the group. When you let's just go back. Actually, something I think Dom didn't really ask you about too much in the sessions, but so you got inspired and you started doing drum corps. You did Hellcats and everything, which we'll come back to. But when you first started writing, like, how did you? I mean, you became so well known for how successfully you wrote for all the famous corps you did. But did you have do you have a certain approach? Like, can you hear, like, you can't, it's not like writing a drum set part. You can't hear all those parts happening for real, especially back then. Like, and now I guess you could put them in finale, but like, did you think you had a skill to hear it all in your head? How did you?
Not at first, but as my writing and my teaching evolved, I got to the point where I knew exactly what the ensemble was going to sound like as I was writing it. So that did happen, but it certainly didn't happen at first. That's for sure. Yeah, and that's something that I think anybody who's writing charts should try to develop that skill. Listen to a lot of music. Listen to, if you're going to if you're writing an Earth, Wind, and Fire show, listen to a lot of that music, and not just that group. Listen to other groups that are similar, and see how you can, how that group use their percussion, use the drum set, use the percussion around it. And not that you want to try to imitate that note for note, but it gives you an idea about the flavor and about when to use the snare drum and when to use the tenors, when to feature the bass drums, when to use a drum set in the pit, and so forth. All of that comes from your sense of listening.
That's a great point. Do you think that if it's better, like, let's say that the first few times I was teaching marching, there was stock charts involved, like, Alfred charts or whatever. And they're good charts. Do you think it's advantageous for someone to, if they're teaching a line for the first few times, to use stock charts, or is it good to just jump in and write?
It's a great question. I think today there are companies that are producing stock material that's really good material. So I think, again, if you keep in mind that you have to deal with the two masters who are controlling you, one being the integrity of the music at hand, the other being the real talent of the kids who are standing in front of you. And if you can keep that perspective and don't just select a stock chart that's way over the head heads of the kids that you really have, I think you can, that can bring you a long way. But there's nothing like writing. In fact, when I was a kid, I was not a good reader. I didn't become a good reader until I started to write.
Right.
You know what I mean, Joe, right?
Yes.
And when I was teaching at Rutgers, I would impart that to all of the students there. I would make them write something. Well, why are we writing? Well, you're writing to learn how to read and learn how to think and put something together. Have an 8-bar phrase make sense. So that was a big thing to me. It really was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's totally, I mean, and I guess you could kind of do it the same way when you sort of reverse engineer. I remember, listening to, having my first book of Rush drum charts and then trying to transcribe a song that wasn't in the book made my reading way better. It's the same thing. But,
right.
And what about technique? That seems to be elusive. Again, you're starting up a program. I'm thinking of my son's school as an example, really, they really good kids, really excited, but do you just need more time ahead of the season to get the technique solid before you start teaching the music? Is it, just supervision of teaching the packet when you're doing exercises or what,
I learned a long time ago that there's nothing that can replace being prepared and being prepared early as the writer teacher. I always try to write one season ahead of where the kids are. So, for example, right now, assuming there's going to be school, they would be getting ready to do marching band, right? Well, I wrote that show back in March, April, May, so that it would be ready. They could rehearse it during the summer, and they'd be ready to go once band camp or the start of school happened. Right now, my co-writer Jim Miller and I are working on the indoor program, which they won't even participate in until probably January, February. But we are working on the material right now so that the minute the opportunity presents itself, we can hand the charts out to the kids. So we always try to think a full season ahead of where we are. And the other thing, Joe, is that I always approach evaluating whether it's a drum line or an individual player. Always teach that he or she or they should play with the acronym I created for the word REST, which stands for relaxed, efficient, smooth, tension-free. And if you can get the kids to understand that and play that way, relaxed, efficient, you don't want to waste energy, you don't want to waste, you want to be nice and smooth, you don't want to have any tension anywhere. And if you can, pay attention to that for yourself as a player and impart that to your kids, I always found that to be very, very helpful.
We did some snare drum lessons with Hudson Music with Rob Wallace that I think at the time were for Drum Guru, and you taught a lot of your, the basic hand technique. And having done actually many clinics for band directors who studied with you at Rutgers in your general percussion class, I was always impressed by how they understood the rudiments of technique. And the way you teach technique, the basics of it are almost exactly the same thing as what I would describe as the way guys like me and Tommy Igoe teach Germanic grip for the drum set. Is that still how you would describe most core teachers are teaching, like snare and tom technique now?
Yeah, well, the first thing is, especially at the high school level, if you don't have the kids in the snare line that are comfortable with traditional grip, let them play match grip. What's the big deal? Who cares? Tommy Igoe has some great lines about traditional versus match, where he says nobody gives a damn except other drummers, right? And I think he's right about that. So if the kids are better players and more comfortable and they can achieve more playing match, then teach match. If not, you want to teach traditional, great. It's only the upper level drum lines and a lot of the great jazz players, drum set players, that play traditional anymore. I mean, whereas when I was a kid, I was taught traditional. That's what happened, We were taught traditional grip. But nowadays, unless you're in a drum line or teaching a drum line or wanting to play jazz, I would start everybody a match and then go to traditional with those kids or in that environment that you thought was appropriate, and go from there. And not one of the things with me, I always concentrated on and drew from my drum set experience. And therefore, I was not as hung up as some other teachers about, I've never taught by inches, by the way. I've never taught 3-inch, 6-inch, 9-inch, 12-inch strokes. I've always taught by a relaxed approach, a flow, if you will. But since it's a uniformity-based activity in marching drumline, I would use a degree of wrist turn to get everybody into the same area without dwelling on, this is a 6-inch stroke. I'd rather use the musical terms. This is pianissimo, this is forte, and this is how you get to it with a certain degree of relaxation coupled with a wrist turn.
All of that stuff, I felt like doing that with the drumline made me a better drum set teacher. In so many ways, like, especially when you're a kid coming up and you're like, I want to make this snare line, all the best drummers on the snare line. And then you start teaching drumline and you realize, like, wow, bass drum is really hard. It's really hard. Like, you're just going, like, no one on drum set does that. So you're getting, and sometimes, like, you have a high school, the kids with the best chops, you kind of have to put them on snare and toms, right? So you're trying to teach complex subdivisions. Yeah. And that's another, like, it's like you have to have a special, or not special, but it's like, and tell me if you agree with this, what I'm about to say. If you don't have a method to address that issue, like the subdividing into your bass drum line or your relaxation, your snare drum line, like any of those things, if you're competitive, the one little plug, the quality can fall out of your line right there,
Well, when you talk about a bass drum line, Tommy Igoe marched in the Bridgman when I was teaching there in the early 80s, and he will tell you today, his first year in the Corps, he could not make the tenor line. But he will tell you that by playing bass drum in that first year, he learned more about how to listen and how important laying his note down in the perfect sequence with the other 4 bass drummers, how important that was to his growth and development as a drum set artist. And I think that's really a terrific lesson. The other thing is, if you've got a bass line with 5 players, okay, you have to put the right player on the right drum. For example, the number 1 drum tends to play more articulated notes. So you want to put the kid who can play good rolls on the 1 drum. The number 2 drum has all the upbeats and all the syncopation. So you want to put somebody who can feel the E's and ahs and ands on the number 2 drum. The number 4 drum has to be able to kick. The number 5 drum, if you're using 5, has to be able to kick. So you want to put the person that can really feel where those kicks belong on the number 5 drum. And you go from there. So, chops go on the 1, rhythmic feel and sophistication goes on the 2, 3 and 4 take care of themselves more often than not. 5 is a kicker, and you go from there. If you put the wrong player on the wrong drum, you're going to have a problem.
Right. Yeah, and then once you know your players, you can go back to the writing. Like if you have two little more advanced kids on the top 2 drums, you can have some fancy stuff as long as you keep it to those drums, right? And
right. Absolutely. Yeah.
For those of you guys, by the way, thank you for all the great comments. I'm seeing all the questions. Please keep them coming in. We'll try to get to a few of them. We've mentioned Tommy a couple of times. And for those of you guys who don't know, my drum line, when I was coming up in high school, Dennis judged a lot of the competitions I was in. And then when I started to teach drumline, Tommy was at the verge of his career taking off. But when he was earlier on, he also taught some drum lines, and sometimes our drum lines competed, and Dennis was the judge. And so like I had the advantage of like, competing, like, and it was just such a great scene in Jersey back then. It was
wonderful.
Oh, it was so awesome. But I do want to bring up this question here, Dennis. It's from James Harrison. A little bit of a generalization, but we talked about guys like Pat and Tommy coming out of your lines, and I don't know. A lot of us feel like there's a little more of a disconnect now between the worlds of drum set and drum corps. You mentioned the Blue Coats thing, which I didn't know, but do you see that happening as well? And if so, what do you think is going on?
I think that kids today have so many opportunities, with social media and devices, and the acoustic instruments, Joe. I think you know this from your industry background. The acoustic percussion instruments are less significant in the scheme of our society today, unfortunately, than they were a decade or two ago. There are too many things going on. So I would say that there is probably more of a disconnect. But if you, the teacher, encourage the kids to study drum set or mallet percussion or orchestral snare drumming or whatever else other than just drumline, I think you're doing that student a big plus service. And you're actually doing yourself a service as well, because you're forcing yourself to deal with elements other than just that rudimental snare drummer who's in front of you. So you have to be prepared for all of that. But I would definitely encourage kids who don't play drum set. At Rutgers, there was a graduate student who was almost 30 years old working on his PhD, who had studied, who was primarily a timpanist. And he studied in my studio for a semester. And I said, okay, well, listen, I'm not going to show you anything on timpani that you don't already know. Let's play drum set. And he said, I've never played drum set in my life. And I thought, wow, here's a 30-year-old a PhD candidate who's never sat behind a kit. So we started, and when he sat behind a kit, he had no idea what to do with his feet. None, zero. But by the end of the semester, I mean, he wasn't great, but he had an idea about how the drum set player works and what the demands are on the player in terms of four-way independence, simple as they were. Nonetheless, he understood what it was all about. And I would definitely encourage any teacher to encourage his or her students to do the same.
Yeah. I think one of the greatest ways, when you teach privately, having connection to your community is so important. And I always got a ton out of teaching the drum lines I did. Not only did I enjoy it, but I got lots of students out of it. But I think by you saying that, you have to encourage the kids. So like if I was teaching drumline, let's say in the 90s, kids were actually coming to me saying, hey, I play a little drum set. I want to take lessons with you. I know you're good at it. I think now, to your point, the kids they may not be seeing the drum set players, but if you teach in your community and they need someone to work with the drum line at the school, I think you can create some drum set players there.
I think you're right. You mentioned Tommy, who, of course, has become this phenomenal player. The other guy that came out of the Bridgman that's become a great player is Pat Petrillo, and a totally different player than Tommy, but in their own styles, they're both magnificent players. And Pat had an interesting experience with drum corps, because before he came to the Bridgman, he was in a corps that taught in a very strict style, very, a squeeze and moan kind of approach, and very regimented. And he knew he wanted to play drum set, okay? So when he came to the Bridgman, we were exactly the opposite of the experience he had in this other corps. And I think it helped him to relax and to groove and to feel. And I think he will tell you that has helped his drum set playing. And I think that's important. That back and forth is critically important.
Yeah. And, we've mentioned Pat and Tommy, and they're both great guys, and they're such respectful guys. You must have made them run a lot of laps and do a lot of push-ups, man.
That wasn't me, man. I wasn't teaching like that because I didn't want to run laps. You know what I mean? That's why I have the other teachers on staff. They take care of the dirty work, you know.
Oh, the good cop, bad cop thing.
Exactly right. Bob Dubinsky was my bad cop to my good cop. Phenomenal. He's a phenomenal teacher.
Right.
Retired, by the way. Had moved to Indiana and just retired. Great, great, great guy. Great teacher.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. The other thing that I mentioned in passing before is your extensive experience with judging. And you've, even up until now, my son has also been, I always look up in the booth, there's Dennis, so sweet, let me go say hello. You must still enjoy doing it, obviously, after all.
I do.
So how do you, I can remember the feeling of getting the judges tape back and being so excited to hear the great Dennis DeLucia comment. With all these drum lines and all these competitions, how do you make each judges tape and make each line feel special, that you have something to offer? I mean, are you trying to impart something that will help or give encouragement, or do you, how do you fulfill what they're expecting of you every time as a judge?
It's a gift, Joe. It's a gift. Well, we always try to be positive, but we're also judging, which means that if there are 12 groups, 12 bands, or 12 drum lines in the show, unfortunately, it's your obligation to determine who should be 12th as well as who should be first. So you have to make those shaded determinations between who should be first, who should be fifth, who should be ninth, and so forth. But I always try to do it in a positive way. My mentor when I grew up in Bergenfield, New Jersey, with the great Dr. Bernard Baggs, he always found a way when he was judging to find a way to tell you that, that you sucked, but to do it in the nicest way possible. And to do it with a positive end game. If you only pay attention to this, then this will get better. And I think part of the judging process, and part of the reason I love it so much, is, in my opinion, it's an extension of the teaching process. Because in a way, I'm teaching. It's just that I'm not standing in front of the band or the corps at every rehearsal. I've got one shot to sit in the booth and go, here's how you can make it better. Oh, this is really good. Here's how you can make this chart a little bit better. And I think that's the approach to take.
When we're teaching, it's interesting you mentioned you got to choose who's in last place. This can be a controversial topic, okay? But if there is a line who has practiced less and they're not as clean, and they get a chance to watch the drum line who has practiced a lot and who's really tight and who's kicking butt, I think that's okay for kids to realize, oh, wait, maybe if we practiced more, we would be better. We don't all get the first place trophy. I don't know. It's like a fine line. You don't want to discourage people, but everybody can't be in first place. I mean, that's also not real life.
I think the confident teacher will make sure that his or her students get to see groups that are maybe a little bit better and maybe even a lot better, because that becomes a goal. That becomes, look, these kids, there's 20 of them, there's 20 of us, they're a little better right now. How did they get to be better than we are right now? Let's take a look, let's analyze, let's listen, let's look, and let's try to get there. But not try to go from here all the way up to here. It's a step process. Mm-hmm. So you want to make sure you get to be a little better, and then a little better, and then a little better, and keep working at it until you're the best.
That's actually a structural problem with some of the competitions, because sometimes the kids can't see the groups that are a little better, because they're like, I've noticed that happened. Some of the lines, they would you'll grab the conscientious teacher who's really on top of it. He'll grab his drum captain and a couple of the section leaders, and they'll go on the sideline and watch. But that, maybe that should be more, you would extend the length of a competition if you did that. But it was always so helpful, even at the football games, to watch the other bands and be like, oh, they're not doing that well, or they're doing that well. And that encourages a healthy competition.
1974 or so again, I guess. I was teaching Hawthorne muchachos who were starting to become a really good drum corps, and of course from Jersey. And the first time that I saw the Santa Clara Vanguard from California with the material written by the great late Fred Sanford, I stood on the track to watch them, and I watched them play, and I listened to their material, and I said to myself, Hotshot, your career is over because you can't do that. You're just not at that level. But I watched and I listened, and I didn't try to imitate because I was doing my own thing with my own style of music, which was very different than Santa Clara's. But nonetheless, I try to learn, okay, how does Fred get that wonderful ensemble clarity? And I would try to listen and analyze and watch. And I would say, okay, even though my style with my corps is very different, there are things that I can learn from the way they do it. And they were winning drums every night in those days. And I learned a lot from watching all the other groups, the Blue Devils with Scott Johnson. And, there are just so many great situations. Paul and Sandy Rennick just signed with Sabian recently. That is so cool because I love those two. And I certainly admire the way they write and teach. They're the best.
Yeah.
Love it.
It's funny because some of the same themes come up. I've been so lucky to do these interviews, and that whole idea of like, okay, I've just seen something great and I'm blown away and maybe even a little intimidated, but you can't be that person. You have to be who you are.
Yeah.
How would you describe, for those who haven't analyzed it closely, the difference between your writing and Fred's and your writing and Scott's?
Wow. I think a lot has to do with the background that we each came from. Fred was a classically trained percussionist, studied with Anthony Cerrone, and on the West Coast, studied classical percussion. I was on the East Coast, self-taught drum set player, but listened, and played. And I took that to my writing and teaching style as Fred took his classical education and background into his style. And they're very different. One could be more notey than the other, but still valid in that genre. So we try to impart what we have learned, what we have experienced in our lives as players and as people, and bring that to the drumline experience.
Yeah. When back in the when you were doing the Hellcats, just to go back a little bit, at West Point. First of all, I didn't know that John Pratt was, like, you had that relationship with him that you had. I learned that from the Sessions interview.
Yeah.
Was there, like, during the time of the Hellcats, and for those who don't know, it's very prestigious West Point drumline that does all the military functions, and it's very difficult audition to get in, correct, Dennis?
Yes.
And what year were you, this was in the 70s or before that?
I graduated from college in May of '66 at the peak of the Vietnam War fiasco, and I got drafted into the Army in June of '66. And my mentors, Dr. Bernard Baggs and Donna Angelica, told me about the Hellcats at West Point. I was living in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and West Point was only an hour's drive. So they wrote letters of recommendation. I drove to West Point and auditioned. You had to audition for a specific opening in the West Point band or the Hellcats or the Washington, D.C. military bands. It was very much like auditioning for a spot in a symphony orchestra. So I got in there, and that was a great experience for me on so many levels. One of which was I had always kind of been the hotshot drummer in Bergenfield, New Jersey, and now I show up at the Hellcats, and for the first time in my life, I'm surrounded by players who are much better than I mean, not just a little, were much better. They knew more and they played better than I did. So I took all the free time that we had, and I just played and played and played and played.
Mhm.
And Jack Pratt was finishing up his 20 years as the section leader of the Hellcats. His last 3 years out of 20 coincided with my 3-year hitch in the Army. So I got to spend 3 years with the legendary John S. Pratt. Very, very interesting experience.
That's great. His works were like, if you study his books, it's kind of what I would describe as traditional rudimental playing. When did the hybrid rudiment thing come onto your radar? Was it in the Hellcats, or was it when you started writing? Like, I know you were even inventing some of that stuff as you went, right? Like in your writing.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of the whole hybrid thing, because to me, we have X number of recognizable patterns called rudiments, and everything else is a variation of sorts or just a thing. I'll never forget, in the late 80s, I got a letter from a fan from Holland who was a huge follower of American drum corps. And he writes this letter to me and says, I've been on a search to find who wrote the first cheese. Cheese is one of the hybrid rudiments. And he said, Mr. DeLucia, you are the first to write a cheese. And I'm going, first of all, if I wrote this thing, I never would have called it a cheese. There's just no way. And it was just a little figure that was a variation of something that already existed. But in the internet age, it was given a name. It was given the name cheese or egg beater or book report or any of those, which I consider to be silly names. But so who's the first? I don't know. I don't care.
Right.
I don't care.
Some of that stuff also, like I was watching some of Klaus Hessler's, like he's really analyzed a lot of the rudiments from other countries.
Yeah.
Some of the Swiss stuff, it has what we would call hybrids because they never came here, or maybe they were never learned. But I don't know. I thought those names were like somebody was, put that in there, and then they're out on the field practicing, and they just gave it a name just so they could tell it, teach it to the kids, and then it stuck, and now it's become.
Yeah, well, in today's era, where you have indoor drum line going on in the winter and spring months, and then drum corps in the spring and summer months, and then marching band in the late summer, fall, you now have opportunities. Kids do, if they catch the marching drumming bug, they can now do it year round at a very high level. Right. So a lot of this stuff comes from them. Just check this out, Johnny. And let's call it whatever, and then it goes on the internet,
right,
and becomes an egg beater.
Right.
So all of that is pretty cool stuff. It's wonderful. It's just not necessarily for me.
Right. I got you. Here's a good question from John LaMattina, who was actually one of our active members and good friend of mine and Dom's. For those of us who are interested, I know you have some books, but overall drumline book materials, what do you recommend? A couple of your favorites and ones you've written.
Well, there are two companies, especially I think, that are really publishing great stuff. One is called Roloff. Mm-hmm. That's spelled ROW-LOFF. Their library is phenomenal. I've written a bunch of things over the years for them. The other is called Tap Space, a little more contemporary. A company started by the great Jim Casella, and they have some great material. So I would go to those two companies. Make sure you're looking at material that is germane to the talent level of the kids that you really have, and then go from there. You have a lot to choose from.
Jim's company's Tap, T-A-P, right? Tap Space.
Yes, Tap Space, yeah.
Cool. I just put up a comment in there, John, and everybody else, with those companies. And the roll-off books, actually, I use a few of the roll-off books in my drum set lessons for snare drum material. I think they're great.
Sure. Yeah, they're great. And a couple of others. First of all, on drum set, I don't know how you feel, Joe, because that's your area, but To me, Tommy Igoe's Groove Essentials, that whole series of books and videos, just fantastic. For all around percussion, I had the honor of writing a chapter for Dr. Michael Udow's new book called Percussion Pedagogy. This is the most comprehensive book I've ever seen in my life for mallet percussion, timpani, concert snare drum, triangle, tambourine, all of that stuff. I mean, it is a magnificent work, percussion, published by the Oxford Publishing Company, Oxford University Press, and a book that I wrote when I was teaching at Rutgers, because when a young kid would come in to audition, I would always be blown away at how many books he or she would have to bring with them, because this book dealt with snare drum, and this book dealt with xylophone, and this book dealt with timpani. And I go, why don't I put a book together that has all of them? So I wrote this book for Olaf called The Drummer's Daily Drill. And it's got some rudimental snare drum things, some orchestral snare drum things, some excerpts on mallet percussion and timpani as well. So I would take a look at this for a little self-promotion.
Yeah.
And Dr. Udow's Percussion Pedagogy and Tommy's Groove Essentials. Those would be the three areas I would go, as well as the Roll-Off Library and the Tap Space Library.
Guys, I just put up in a comment, and also I'll in the SEN site, sabianed.com, for those of you who haven't logged in a while.
Oh, we lost Joe, so I'm gonna keep talking. One of the things that I decided upon many years ago in my teaching was that one way to evaluate any individual drummer or any drum line is to think about the 5 T's: time, technique, touch, taste, which is musicality, tone. I think most of those are self-explanatory. Taste involves, expression and dynamics and musical flavor and idiomatic integrity and so forth. Touch is one that we unfortunately don't talk about that much, but you can have great technique, meaning that your hold and your flow, but man, the moment of truth is when the stick or mallet hits the instrument. That touch is so important right there. So time, technique, touch, taste, tone, the 5 T's. 2 more can be added to define a good student, and they would be talent and teachability. Those elements that are all T words, I think, would define a really good student and a really good player, whether an individual or an ensemble. So, where's Joe? There's Joe.
Can you hear me?
Joe moved.
Sorry. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Okay, good. Yeah, I don't know. We were just talking. Sometimes there's a crash. I'm back. I moved to a different computer.
Good.
I'm sorry. So did I interrupt you saying something?
No, but I kept yakking.
Good.
Is my want.
Yeah, it's funny. I'm on Wi-Fi in the studio, so I just aborted. Anyway, so where were we when I inserting moments? Oh, I was saying that I will share your book links. I'll share some links in the site. If you haven't logged in a while, please log in and
Thank you.
check that out. Dennis, 2 more things I want to talk about. There's never enough time, and one is, of course, we've been given this wonderful platform by Sabian. And Sabian Education Network, and you've been with Sabian for quite a long time, since '87, I think you said. So, what brought you on board? And we talked about, we both had the honor of knowing Bob Zildjian.
Yes.
But talk a little bit about your long relationship with Sabian.
Well, I was teaching the drum corps from Bloomington, Indiana, called Star of Indiana, and one day at a show, a wonderful man named Roy Edmonds approached me and said, we'd like to sign you. Is that a possibility? And don't forget, Sabian was created in the very early 80s by Bob Zildjian, factory in Meductic, Canada. but as part of his separation from the other Zildjian clan, he was not allowed to import Sabian cymbals into the United States for, I forget the exact length, but the first 2 or 3 years that Sabian existed, which got to the mid 80s, they weren't allowed to sell or give any product to the United States. So when I signed in 87, that was, I mean, Sabian had only been in the States for about a year at that point. And again, Roy Edmonds and his wonderful wife, Sue, pitched and sent me some samples, which I loved. And I said, okay, this is the place for me. And I've loved over the years their willingness to innovate and create something new. It's one of the great things. They make a great product. That goes without saying. But one of the things that I've always admired is how they are willing to innovate, willing to try new things. And one of my proudest things, this is a cymbal signed by Bob Zildjian in the year 2000 when he was inducted into the PAS Hall of Fame, and he signed it to my daughter, Chelsea. I think you can see that. Yes. And it's one of my most prized possessions, and that's the kind of guy that Bob was. Bob was a wonderful, wonderful man, just absolutely wonderful human being.
He's a really special person and supported so many people and was such a visionary in our industries.
Yeah,
you know, and
now, of course, his son Andy is running the company and doing a good job.
That's right. And Andy's has the same. You know, we've been having, of course, the Sabian Education Network running for several years now, but also Andy and I have had conversations just this week. His commitment to education is equal to what his father's was, so that's great. We're the best company there. Sabian also honored you.
Yes.
Which was well deserved and a nice thing that was done.
You know, to be recognized by Drum Corps International or WGI or the New Jersey Drum Corps Hall of Fame, whatever, those are magnificent. But the ones that include non-rudimental drummers, non-marching percussion are especially important to me. The Sabian one, because, I mean, you got all the great drum set players and the orchestral players, the Percussive Arts Society recognition, the same thing. And again, as I said earlier, they're not just recognizing me. They're not recognizing me because I'm not the player. They're recognizing us, all the kids who participated and all the staff people that taught alongside of me along the way. But those recognitions are very, very important to me, very dear to my heart.
Well, they're well deserved. And you also, you know, one of the things I've always really admired and found fascinating about you is you broadened out your other, besides your writing and teaching and judging, you became a consultant in the industry to different companies, including Sabian.
Yes.
And, you know, is that something, I mean, I'm assuming, having done a little of the same thing, you know, kind of in my own little way, that's something that's just sort of grew with your career where you realize, wow, I have a place where I can see what's happening in the industry. Maybe these companies might value my expertise.
A lot of young players and students and teachers very often will ask, I'm sure you've been asked a lot, how do I get an endorsement with a company? How do I get an endorsement with Yamaha or Sabian or Remo, whatever? And when people ask me that question, my response is usually about what are you doing or what have you done that would make one of those companies pay attention to you? And when I got my endorsements, there weren't a lot of people around to do that. There weren't a lot of companies seeking out. So I think the pool was smaller, but I tried really hard to be able to give something to, in the 70s, to Ludwig, which was my first company, and then a couple of years with Slingerland, and then a lot of years with Premier, and now for the last 20 with Yamaha as far as drums. And as you said, since 87 with Sabian, since 1974 with Remo, and I've never changed. That's a long time. But I think you have to make your mark, whether that's write a book, teach a great drum line, make your mark as a player slash teacher slash writer. And I found that writing is really important because it's everlasting. So if you write the book, if you write the charts, whatever, you can bring that to companies to say, hey, check this out. This is what I'm capable of. This is what I do. And I'd love to be a part of the Sabian family, the Yamaha family, or whatever, and go from there. Very, very important.
That's wonderful advice. I mean, just in this hour, the ideas that we've touched on have been pretty amazing. And with Sabian, I'm assuming that all throughout the different high schools and the high-level course, DCI, DCA, you've written, you used a lot of the different products. I'm assuming you've used AA, AAX, maybe some of the HH stuff in those environments.
The model that I came to really like the most as far as hand cymbals for outdoor was the Synergy series, which was an HHX product. And I'm not sure that the company calls it Synergy anymore, but it's an HHX hand-hammered hand cymbal. Those became my favorites, about an 18-inch diameter. On drum set, for jazz, I like a hand-hammered ride, about a 21 inch. If I'm playing rock or fusion, I like an AAX because it's a little brighter, a little more cutting. Again, 21 inch, and an array of crash cymbals. I don't like everything, just to be different sizes, but in the same cut, the same vein. So I use an array of cymbals.
Yeah, that's great. And it's it's funny in the marching world with high school. Sometimes again, dealing with the different levels of the kids that you have, you might be in a situation where some of the beginners you might have to have on cymbals, and yet a cymbal crash cuts through everything. So if it's placed in the wrong spot, so you still, and also without the metal sounds in the drum line, it's just like playing a drum set with no cymbals. It's missing something.
That's right. Well, in 1985, when I started with Star of Indiana, one of the things we did maybe 2 years in was we took our cymbal players off the field and we put all of our cymbal sounds in the pit where A, they could be heard, and B, each individual player could pick up a pair of 20s in this crash, put them down, pick up a pair of 16-inch thin French on that next crash, play a suspended cymbal roll. So we started that trend, and that trend has continued. So I think nowadays you don't find as many groups using a marching cymbal section as you do getting all those symbolic sounds from the pit.
Right. We're almost at an hour, and I don't want to keep you here all day, but I do have one more topical question.
Sure.
So given that you've taught so many band directors also, in addition to all your drum corps activities, and we're doing the community outreach of going in to work with a band director is one of the greatest things you can do to develop a relationship and get a constant flow of students and get more kids playing drums, right? If I was gonna go into do a drum clinic at a school with a non-percussion band director for the first time, what would you say were the first couple of things you'd advise me to do that would help that band director in such a way that they would say, wow, this Joe is an asset to me as a clinician. Maybe I should send him some students.
Great question. I would make a series of short video lessons. Lesson 1, match grip. Lesson 2, the strokes. Lesson 3, tuning a snare drum or whatever. Lesson 4, the single stroke roll. Lesson 5, a paradiddle, and so forth. Each one a very short lesson so that the teacher doesn't have to plow through, an hour and a half of stuff. He wants to learn about Joe Bergamini's approach to learning flams. You can go to the flam lesson. I would do that, and therefore, you could send that to the director in advance of your live appearance. And therefore, your live appearance is just going to reinforce or expand upon what you had already prepared on tape. It's the first thing I would do.
Mm-hmm. And then any special thing you do with with the drummers when you finally have them in your presence?
I would do the same thing. I would show them the videos so that they would always have that reference when you're not standing there. I would start with the grip, the strokes, the single stroke roll, just not but just just to keep it nice and even, and go through the list of rudiments. I teach the rudiments by learning ability, teaching and learning ability, not by families. I don't put all the flams together, because if you can't play a simple flam, you can't play the flam tap or Swami triplet or anything else, right? So I put the 40 PAS rudiments in what I consider to be a logical teaching sequence that drew from different families of flams according to when they would be the most appropriate to teach.
We when we did the Drum Guru packs, I remember how you organized the core rudiments. So you learn a flam, you learn a drag, you learn a paradiddle. We're going to repurpose that. It will be available on the Hudson site for those who are interested to see how Dennis broke that down. So when I have more info about that, I'll also share it. And then
we used the great Jeff Prosperi, who was part of those sessions, who is just an amazing player, and he's currently the section leader of the Hellcats.
Yeah,
he's an amazing musician.
He was terrific. Yeah, that stuff will be on the Hudson site soon. And then a PDF that I'm sharing in the Hudson site is something, Dennis, you sent to me, which is great. It's a Y band little PDF, which is talking about why it's great for all kids to do band.
Right. What do you get out of it?
Exactly. I will share that in the SEN site. And thank you guys for watching. This has been great. Sorry about my little glitch there. Always a challenge with the internet. I can give 30 1-hour drum lessons for the last 4 days and not have one interruption in my service. But let me get online to go live, and boom,
So it's my fault.
No, I didn't think of that. Anyway, Dennis, it's always a pleasure to talk to you and to get your wisdom, and thank you for giving us an hour of your expertise. This has been really a valuable session. I think I learned a lot, and I know from judging from the comments, our members have also learned a lot. So thanks for your decades of loyalty to Sabian. The company's very happy to have you.
My pleasure, believe me. My pleasure.
Awesome.
And thank you for doing this, and thank you for including me in the series of interviews you've done. You've done a great job with them.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. This has been great. I was looking forward to this one, and it exceeded my expectations. So thanks. So guys, just a little bit of news. Oh wow! Since I'm here at my desk, I can actually look. Dom will be live on Thursday with Murray Piper on his 2:00 session. There will not be a Friday session next week. We're taking a week off, but I'll be back the following Friday, the 28th, with the great Todd Zuckerman. And I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun. And then I'm going to give you guys a little, it looks like I just got confirmation within this last hour that on the Friday, September 4th, we will have Brian Fraser Moore as our guest, which I get to interview all my heroes. It's like crazy. And then on September 11th, we decided that we needed to bring Billy Cobham back right away because the session we had with him a couple of weeks ago was so much fun. So we're going to have a part 2 with the legendary Billy Cobham the weekend.
He's a drum corps guy.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
Marched in the Long Island Sunrisers.
Did you have him? Did you know?
Oh, I wish he marched before I started teaching the Sunrisers.
Oh, and Gad did some drum corps stuff too, right?
Yes, up in Rochester. And was taught by the legendary Bobby Thompson, who taught me.
Yeah.
The rudiments. Yeah, great.
And there's so many other drum set players that did it, even like guys like Keith Carlock, Jason Sutter, that are great set players now. So it's a strong connection, and you're one of the biggest advocates of that drum set drum corps connection. So
thank you. And some of them even admit
it. Awesome. Well, thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate it. Thanks, you guys, for watching. We'll see you guys next time, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joe.